First of all, welcome to ISME's video series with the HSA on managing stress at work. I am Cait Lynch. I'm the HR advisor here with ISME, and I am here today with Patricia Murray. Patricia is the Senior Work and Organisational Psychologist with the Health and Safety Authority. Now, Patricia, conflict is an interesting word. It can be, it comes with very negative connotations, but it's not necessarily always negative, but it can have an impact on a business, and it can come to the fore where, you know, an employee it can contribute to a work-related stress situation, anything like that. So can you tell us, first of all, how conflict can come about and what the telltale signs of, I suppose, negative or damaging conflict in the workplace are?
Yeah, I mean, conflict can come about for a myriad of reasons. And the reason the Health and Safety Authority is involved in the space, I suppose, is because it is a known stressor. So any of us in conflict, whether it's in families or friend groups or communities or neighborhoods, conflict causes distress in the human psyche. And therefore, if it's let go untreated and becomes chronic, it can be a stressor and lead to stress, and indeed lead to lots of other ailments and malaise in the company. So the health and safety is involved in it because of that element to it. It can lead to violence or stress or other health and safety issues. And we have, within our Act, we obviously have a section that looks at employer responsibility for all the employees, including improper conduct of behaviours at work. And sometimes, you know, looking for conflict or seeking conflict or escalating conflict is an improper conduct at work. And then the employer therefore has a duty to look after that insofar as they can, insofar as it's reasonable. So that's just to give you a bit of background on it. Conflict, it's so many different people look at conflict differently. Different personality types will deal with conflict in a very matter-of-fact way. Another person will find it very distressing, even the most minor bit of conflict. And others then still, you know, like some conflict and they get a little bit bored if there's none and they seek out a little bit. So really, it's a big, big open area. But where there's a workplace, it can be a very difficult issue to deal with because we have all health and safety items going on at work. We can't have conflict interfering with health and safety. So if someone is not going to tell somebody something that's important for their job, or they're not going to give them information, or they're going to withhold something, or they're going to treat them in a way that's always a little bit mean so that their mood is deflated and they're not performing as well, it obviously has implications, not just for health and safety, but for performance. So it's really a big business issue, conflict is. And we know it from a lot of the big stories that have come about over the last few years, which started in a conflict between two people or three people and escalates into massive tragedies, whether it's in families or in workplaces. So what we need to do as an employer is keep things to a minimum if they arise as conflicts. We cannot get rid of all conflict, but we need to have systems in place where they escalate that we can manage those conflicts in a reasonable way.
Okay. Now, earlier in the year, the HSA, together with the WRC, developed a new code of conduct on bullying in the workplace. So how, in light of that code of conduct and the changes that have come in within that, what are the important points for an employer to bear in mind if they get a bullying claim?
Great question. And we actually ourselves and HSA did a couple of seminars earlier in the year on that very point. So it's very timely. So the Code of Practice, which was developed by the WRC and ourselves, and actually took a year or two to develop, it was launched in December last year. It really outlines what bullying is. Now, it doesn't change the definition of bullying. So it's a repeated inappropriate behavior by a person against others that a reasonable person would find offensive and undermining. It's not a subjective test. So some people have said, well, if I feel it's bullying, then it is, or if I feel that it's bad, it is. That's not the test we use, which is called the subjective test. It's an objective test, which is the reasonable person would find it undermining, demeaning. And now the new Code of Practice does look at case law in Ireland, and we did look at some high and Supreme Court rulings. So we had to then kind of further explain the definition. And really what we said was, if you feel you're being bullied, you have to look at behaviors, you have to look at what's happening, and what you really want is to remedy it and address it at source in the enterprise. But you really need to look at whether or not it meets the criteria for severe destructive behavior against a person. So it isn't just a conflict with somebody. I'm not saying conflict with somebody is easy. It sure is not. But that's not bullying. Or someone is doing something and I don't agree with the way they're doing it. or someone is asking me to do things repeatedly and I don't want to do those things and I don't believe I should be asked to do them. They might all be valid employment rights issues, but they're not bullying. So bullying is a severe, destructive way of relating that's targeting a person or persons and undermining them. So that's the first thing the code kind of highlights. Second thing the code highlights is that there are systems in place, both informally and formally, for an employer to deal with it. Previously, we had a lot of people who didn't want to do the informal approach because they felt as if it was treating their conflict or their bullying as something too light. So they were rushing to the formal. And really the formal is not appropriate for lots of bullying complaints. So we brought in a secondary filter of 2 informal phases. And one of them is a lighter informal, and the second is an intermediary phase of dealing with the problem, but it's still informal. Finally, if the bullying doesn't stop or doesn't go away or it's severe, then you've got a formal approach, which is an investigation. And we outline some of the ways a company should do the investigation. Like there are guidelines in our code of practice for how to do an investigation so that it meets the criteria. Don't forget, employers, if in the future you were in court for personal injuries about bullying, you really want to be able to show that you met the standard of our code of practice. So whereas it's not primary legislation, it is affiliated to our primary legislation. And it is a code that is used in courts. So the code really clearly outlines both the definition, what the behaviors are for both the bullied and the accused. And then it says to the employer, these are systems in place for you to do and keep records of that in case you ask for it later.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really important point to raise, is that while it is not primary legislation, it is the standard that's looked at in a court case. If you're standing in front of a WRC adjudicator, this is the document that is going to be looked at. I think employers need to keep that in mind every time they are looking into something like this.
Yeah, and don't forget, you can get the copies of the code on our website as well. So just go into the HSA website, you'll find copies of our code of practice. And indeed, it's on the WRC website too. Really, every employer should have that in their place of work. It is really good to have it if you do get a complaint. And I'd say again, again, it's another topic that people are afraid of. But if someone comes forward saying, I'm being bullied, the first thing to do is sit down and listen. And you might find that with discussion, the person is actually calling out something different. And they're using the word bullying because in a way we've come used to describing everything as bullying. It's not the be and end all. It doesn't capture everything. You might then find that really you've got a conflict with somebody. Let's deal with that. As soon as you deal with it, the better, rather than letting it fester.
Absolutely. I think, bullying has become a catch-all term in some instances. And I think the first thing an employer has to do is determine, are they dealing with bullying? Are they dealing with a personality clash? Are they dealing with a conflict? What exactly they are dealing with? Once they get through that stage, Patricia, and they're starting to, I suppose they've gone through an informal way of dealing with bullying claim, perhaps they've had to go down a formal route. These things take time. HR procedures, they are time consuming. You do have to abide by the rules of natural justice, provide a fair procedure. What are the obligations during a process to deal with a bullying claim to both parties involved? Because I think sometimes you can forget that there is somebody who may not have been aware that there was any issue even that's suddenly been brought into this process. So what are the health and safety obligations there?
Your duty of care to both parties. So you have to be reasonable to the person making the complaint, but you have to also be reasonably faithful to the systems and the code. So somebody who decides, I'm going to go off, I'm going to get my buddy to do an investigation. I got a complaint here. I'll get my buddy from down the road, and that'll be enough for me. First of all, you don't rush into an investigation. It might not be warranted. And you could find yourself doing an investigation which should not have been done. And then the person against whom the complaint was made might well have a case themselves because an investigation occurred about something that was on the face of it, not even a bullying accusation. So employers, be careful here. You just need to be loyal to the code of practice. Go slow, but not too slow, but look at what the case is and be very mindful that the person is innocent unless proven guilty. So you're going to try and talk to the person making the accusation, clarify what it is. If you see clearly and you get advice even, this is not a bullying act, even though the person is saying it is, you have to make the ultimate decision. I don't see this as a bullying accusation. I'll deal with it as conflict, or I'll deal with it as whatever, and I'll deal with it. But I'm not progressing it as bullying because I don't feel it meets the criteria. You're totally entitled to do that once you make a note of what that decision is based on, what's the rationale. Now, obviously, if we got that later and the rationale didn't stand up, we in the HSA would be saying, we're overriding what you're saying there, and our view is that it is X or Y. But you also have to, while you're doing whatever you're doing, be very supportive of the person accused. They have to get a copy of the complaint if it's going to go formal, if it's going to be investigated. They have to be given access to the complaint in writing and be able to answer that complaint in full and give their version of events. And then if you're going to do mediation, both parties have to be willing to do mediation. If you're going to do an investigation, both parties have to be informed and have their full rights during that investigation. And it has to be an independent, competent person doing the investigation. So ideally, you have all these things at your disposal, but ideally, you try to sort it out at an informal stage. Perhaps somebody did something, they might admit to it, they maybe think the other thing I didn't do, or I didn't mean that effect. So there's a little bit there of, a proper competent person dealing with that. And often I'd say it might be better to employ a mediator to even do that piece for you, so that you're not in it yourself as the employer. And to do a piece, maybe 3 meetings, 2 independent meetings, 1 together, and seeing if you can solve it. And then what you do then going forward is you monitor and say, we sorted this now, we're not going to leave this out there in the ether. I'm going to monitor this once a week and then once a month and see, is everything sorted? It can be done that way. It really can. Even the most intractable accusations can be managed. But again, like we talked about earlier, you have to get involved.
Absolutely. And I think the monitoring is a very valid point as well, because I think for particularly for the ISME members, for the small and medium enterprises where a business owner is trying to do 100 things at once, they're trying to keep the show on the road, and then all of a sudden this comes in, they want to get it cleared off their desk, they want to get it done, and once they've finished the process, they go, great, one less thing to worry about. But I think it is important that you have to keep in touch with the parties. You have to make sure that everything is progressing as it should, for a good period of time afterwards, make sure that everything is okay.
You do. And even over time, that can be a once a month, like little even a protocol of an email to the parties or to one of the parties, just to make sure that you've got a little record that, because sometimes it can be like month 3 or month 4 afterwards that something can start raising its head again, and you just don't want that to get back into that space. So you want to just, if there's another issue, you want to get back in there and just try and remedy it. I know employers who are watching now are probably thinking, oh gosh, do I have to do all this? But it's sounding more time consuming than actually it is once you deal with it. Thinking about the doing of it is more difficult indeed than doing it, because most employers and people involved in business are doers and they like to get things done. And so I would advise just keep that hat on and get in and do this, even if you're uncomfortable with it. And then, everything will get better. It's not doing that's the problem. So, just get involved in it a bit.
Absolutely. To move on to something again that is cropping up more and more, obviously over the last while, a lot of businesses have rather suddenly moved to remote working, and all of a sudden teams that were sitting in the same office that could, stand up and borrow a pen off somebody's desk are suddenly cities apart. They're and they're having to communicate via email, via Zoom, via phone, via text message, via WhatsApp, and it's all very strange. And even myself, within ISME, it's been an adjustment. And I'm getting a lot of employers coming to me saying, I'm noticing over the last while, and I think it's increasing over the last few months, that as this has dragged into kind of over the year mark, and it's just getting longer and longer, conflicts are erupting, personalities are clashing. People who got on for 20 years are suddenly finding it really difficult to work together. What's going on and how do I deal with it? So what is the advice there for this remote environment that we've all found ourselves in?
Yeah, this remote environment, which may well be coming to some kind of close in the unfolding months ahead of us. My experience of it, and really, I suppose this has never happened before, so it's very hard to look up research on, a global pandemic and how it has affected people, because it's not the normal moving to home working. There's very little on it from psychology or sociology, but there is some research on kind of how the social environment affects people and how they behave, and how being on your own, isolated, affects people and how they behave with others and how they socialize, and also our memory of the social cohesion we have in one environment we can lose that memory when we're out of that environment, and we lose it for the reason of survival. So we don't want to remember all the great times we had with people in work because we don't have it now. So you'll find that when people moved home first, there was quite a bit of loss of feeling attached to others. But soon what we do is we adapt to that and try and forget about it and look at the positives of being at home, which is, you can maybe put some washes on, you can go for more walks at different times, you can change your work pace a little bit. And so what we do is we try and look for the advantages of each situation. We try and forget the things that we're missing. So what's happened, unfortunately, now, I think a little bit is when we're looking at going back to work, there's a bit of a drag and people aren't so keen maybe at going back because they've lost the memory of the good things about being at work. Now, what they need to really think about is, what did I miss when I was at home first? Try to memorize what you missed when you got home first, this time last year, perhaps. Because there obviously are things that we miss from being together. The biggest thing people get really from work is the social cohesion, the friendships, the relations, the chats, the informal meetings and greetings, and things that you don't predict in your day, the unpredictable. So you need to try and focus on that if you're going back into the workplace. The difficulty with being out of work and conflicts arising more is really because of that, because we don't have the smoother over of the human contact. We're much more likely to think negative things, to be negative in our behaviors, and to distrust the other's intention if we're not looking at their face, if we're looking at their email. So that's really been a problem in terms of conflict. I've noticed that myself from complaints to the authority and people talking about bullying. And it's really, they're assuming, we assume things from the communication that we think the other person means, which really we wouldn't assume if they were standing before us, or if we could wander into their office and say, whoa, what did you mean by this? They'd go, oh, gosh, you didn't mean that. Okay. So the two things are very aligned. And hopefully soon we'll be more face-to-face in some form, whether it's hybrid or full-time or part-time. And that will really alleviate some of that conflict. In the meantime, what employers really have to do sometimes is have some face-to-face or phone contact, not just email, with employees and with managers, and encourage all managers to do a phone call and to do a face-to-face Zoom thing like we're doing here, or to do something where you're seeing the face, you're seeing the person, or 3 or 4 people on a call, not even to do with work, just to do with it's Friday afternoon, set up a call, particularly now as we're kind of getting ready for another shift back and there's a bit of drag there. It would be a good time to start doing more of those face-to-face, interactive, social, get ready for going back to work, to kind of undo some lingering conflict that might be there and lingering among teams.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, as we start to prepare for getting back to work, there's another issue that is coming up, and that is that in terms of this global pandemic and what's going on and guidance and all the rest of it, everybody has different views and everybody has placed varying importance on, various things. And one of the things that is coming into play is that, employees who previously would never have had an issue, they're just getting on great and working together. All of a sudden, one of them might have huge reasons to have concerns about this, and another one might be a little bit more relaxed, and all of a sudden there's a clash there, and employers are ringing me and asking me, this issue is it's nothing really to do with work. It's to do with their attitudes to life outside of work. Do I have to deal with this? So what would your thoughts be around those kind of issues as they crop up?
Okay, I mean, I'm sensing that there's some underlying thing that might not be what you're suggesting, but obviously, if it's to do with someone being vaccinated or not, then no employee has the right to ask another, and neither does the employer. But if people have this, and they may well have lingering fears about the behavior of the other, whether there be social behavior during lockdown or some other social behavior during COVID that they disapprove of, they're not entitled, if you like, to kind of operationalize that in the workplace. Now, everyone's entitled to have their own opinion, they're entitled to have their own view, and they're entitled to think I'm no longer going to be sitting down for coffee with Pat or with Mark, because I've re-engineered my opinion of him or her. And usually that will go quite quickly when people are back in the workplace and the old habits of the workplace reform themselves, whereas there might be some novelties in the reforming. Usually they slip back to somewhat similar patterns. But I would say that really the employers need to just make it quite clear at the beginning that it's a workplace and that people may have had issues around what other people are doing, but the workplace is safe. We're following the protocols. And insofar as we need to obey all the health and safety and indeed public health protocols, we're following them. And that's as far as it goes. So nobody could be interfering with anybody else's kind of civil or privacy rights in that regard. And everyone can be reminded, it's up to you to protect yourself. If you want to wear extra mask or extra glove or protection, you're welcome. If you don't want to go to the canteen, if you don't want to fuck, that's fine. But that's the way the system has been set up, and employers just have to make it clear what the protocol is. And people like protocols and clarity. So once you do that, you'll find sometimes the rest will dissipate, and the person who might be the most vehemently not going to do X or Y day one might be the very person who day 5 is breaking all their own previous edicts. So once everyone follows the protocols, then that's what the employer has to really just look out for.
Absolutely, and I think that's the huge piece from this area and coming back into the workplace is the importance of those protocols and the importance of following them, outlining what the expectations are of your employees, that they will follow the procedures that you've put in place, etc. I think that's a massive one. So just to sum up on the conflict, and I know it's a big ask because it's such a huge area, but do you have any kind of tips or systems for dealing with conflict in the workplace that employers can utilize?
Well, if I was to say, first of all, try to prevent conflict happening. Now, I mean, again, I don't want employers sitting there laughing at me as I say this. I know that it's very difficult to prevent conflict in any area of life, but there are certain things that escalate conflict. And there, if you have an environment where you're pitching people against each other, or you're making one person do something that is going to annoy another person, and it's going to be easier for you. So try to engineer out like conflict corners or conflict junctions in the system of work. And try to ensure that people who are doing different jobs have got protocols indeed in place for the doing of those jobs that don't interfere with the well-being of another group. An example might be one group who have to do administrative work for another group, making sure that they're not going to be asked for their administrative deadlines like on Friday at 4. That's going to cause conflict. So just make sure that your systems of work are reasonably safe in terms of avoidance of conflict within them. Secondly, make sure that anyone in a managerial role reinforces the proper behavior and way to treat people. And that is, even if you don't like them or if you don't like what they're saying, you treat them with the definite standard of respect. And that has to be absolutely reinforced from top management. And thirdly, then, that you have a culture and climate in the organization that people are allowed to say things early that they feel they need to say, and they can be heard. And even if you do nothing about it, you were heard, Patricia. I didn't agree with what you said about this, but I listened to it, and it's noted and recorded. But I'm not going to this time accede to what you wanted. But I hope you can accept that, and maybe we'll look at it again in 6 months. So you're kind of avoiding the person building up a conflict. But you will get conflicts though, so you have to have a system to deal with them. And if they're bullying, you go down the bullying road, and if they're not, don't put them down the bullying road, but still don't just leave them there to linger. Lingering means festering. So just have something to deal with it.
Absolutely. I think that is very, very true. Anything left to fester is always going to be worse by the time you get to it. Okay, well, we will end it there. Thank you very much, Patricia, for giving your time and your very valuable insight to this little series that we're running.